6 a.m. Saturday morning. I stood in my driveway, slippers on, coffee steaming in hand, staring at the faint pink of dawn creeping over the rooftops. Then I heard the unmistakable wail of sirens. 2 police cruisers rolled up, lights flashing, casting red and blue streaks across my garage and the neatly trimmed hedges. My neighbor, Marlene Pearson, was on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, shouting as if the universe had personally wronged her. "Yes, he's right here. Arrest him. He's been parking illegally for months and nobody does anything," she screamed. The officers glanced at me. I glanced at them. My truck was parked perfectly in my driveway, on land I owned outright. One officer exhaled like he had just walked into a scene he'd seen 100 times before. What Marlene didn't know was that for 3 months she had been filing complaints about me directly to my office. Claims that I was some rogue officer, a threat, someone who needed to be disciplined. She had no idea I was the installation commander at East Wind Air Force Base, her boss's boss's boss. And this morning, she had just made the mistake that would cost her. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness sharpen my focus. Have you ever had a neighbor so obsessive they called the cops on you for nothing at all? Where are you watching from right now? Drop a comment. Let's see how far this nightmare neighbor problem spreads. 14 days after moving in, a note appeared on my windshield. Cream-colored cardstock, neat margins, almost formal in presentation. Township Code 22B. All vehicles must be parked at least 18 inches from the property line. Your vehicle is in violation. Please remedy immediately. I crumpled it without hesitation. My truck was parked on property I owned, land I had purchased for $310,000 cash. The next morning, a zoning inspector showed up, looking like a man who had just lost a bet with the universe. He measured my driveway, sighed, and said, "Sir, you're fine. You could park a semi here legally." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Marlene Pearson. She's done this to at least 3 other families in the neighborhood. 2 of them moved. You're not dealing with just a crank. She's a pattern." That's when I realized my neighbor wasn't simply annoying. She was a problem, and a persistent one. I should probably introduce myself properly. My name is Colonel Ethan Callahan, 48, United States Air Force, 24 years in uniform. 3 months ago, I became the installation commander at East Wind, responsible for 14,500 personnel, military and civilian alike. It's essentially like being the mayor of a small city, except with fighter jets, multi-million-dollar equipment, and a lot more paperwork. I made a deliberate choice to live off-base, in a normal neighborhood. I wanted my daughter, Layra, to be just 16, without the weight of military bureaucracy pressing down on her every day. Layla lost her mother 3 years ago. Sophia, the woman who had held our little family together, passed away after a battle with cancer. Since then, we'd bounced between 3 bases in 2 years, moving schools, leaving friends, leaving grief behind in zip codes that didn't care. Our house in Maple Hollow, population 7,500, 25 minutes from the base, was supposed to end that cycle. A 2-story colonial with a driveway full of character. Cracks, a small American flag, signs that someone lived here, someone mattered. By day, the neighborhood was quiet and normal. Saturday lawnmowers, sprinklers ticking rhythmically, the heat radiating off asphalt driveways that could warm the soles of your boots. This was exactly what we needed. And then there was Marlene. Marlene Pearson was in her late 50s, hair teased into a gravity-defying helmet, married to Hank, who looked perpetually apologetic for sins no one could trace back to him. No kids, works part-time at the base commissary as a cashier, a detail that becomes painfully relevant later, and drives a white Lexus so spotless it practically reflected the sun. She had appointed herself the neighborhood watch captain of Maple Hollow Drive, even though there was no HOA, no neighborhood association, no council, just Marlene, a smartphone camera, and the conviction that she alone could prevent suburban chaos. I met her on the 2nd day of moving in. I was unloading boxes from my pickup when she appeared at the property line, sudden as a thunderclap. "Welcome to Maple Hollow Drive," she said, eyes narrowing at my truck. "We maintain very high standards here." Her emphasis on standards made it sound as if I'd driven a circus caravan into the cul-de-sac. I smiled, shook her hand, made polite small talk. I thought to myself, I've negotiated with foreign military officials in combat zones. Surely I can handle one suburban busybody. But I couldn't. The note on my windshield on day 4 was just the opening salvo. Marlene had weaponized bureaucracy, and she wasn't going to stop. Week 1, she escalated to the township zoning office. Week 2, she found a new obsession, my trash cans. Township rules dictate garbage bins must be off the curb by 7 p.m. on collection day. Reasonable. I usually rolled mine back by 6:30, sometimes 6:45 if work ran late. One Thursday, I arrived at 6:59, grabbed my bins, wheeled them inside, and went to help Layla with calculus. The next morning, a certified mail envelope awaited me. 3 photos, timestamps at 7:02, 7:04, 7:06 p.m. Threats of fines. Marlene had stood outside, documenting my trash like a forensic analyst. I set an alarm after that, 6:30 p.m. sharp. Never missed it. That same week, I noticed her bins still sitting curbside at 9 p.m., 2 hours late. So I did exactly what she did. Photographed them, sent them to the township with a polite note. 2 weeks later, the form letter arrived. Thank you for your concern. No fines issued for Marlene. Apparently, her influence carried weight my new presence could not. I started keeping records. Dates, times, screenshots, everything. My inner military logistics officer activated. Marlene escalated next to my truck, filing a complaint claiming it blocked sightlines. Officers Ramirez and Hicks arrived. They measured, sighed, and told her I was within my rights. Park straight if it makes you feel better, Ramirez suggested. I didn't. I requested public records, $15, 10-day wait. When the PDF arrived, I read 63 pages of insanity. Noise complaints, zoning complaints, inspector general complaints. 47 in 18 months. This wasn't petty. This was a documented pattern. I filed my own complaint with the police department, showing a clear record of harassment. 3 days later, Lieutenant Parker called. Colonel Callahan, we're aware of Mrs. Pearson. Very aware. Until she crosses a legal line, our hands are tied. Your documentation is excellent. Layla leaned against my shoulder that evening. Dad, why don't you just tell her you're the base commander? I shook my head. That felt too easy. I wanted her to face consequences for her actions, not my rank. Sometimes justice is best served by patience, persistence, and letting someone dig their own grave. 2 weeks passed. Every morning I woke with the quiet expectation that Marlene Pearson would have found a new way to make my life difficult. And almost without fail, she did. It started with subtle things. Packages left precariously on my front steps, letters with vague threats tucked under the door. And one morning I noticed the mailbox slightly bent, enough that the flag didn't stay upright. It was small but deliberate. The message was clear. I'm watching, Colonel Callahan. Layla noticed too. She was quietly observant, always alert to the shifting currents in our little suburban world. That morning, as we stepped out to get the paper, she whispered, Dad, her curtains were open at 6:15. She's filming again. Let her, I said. We'll collect evidence. Evidence became our new obsession. I installed cameras, motion sensors, and even a weatherproof trail camera in the backyard. Every time she did something, the footage captured it. Every movement, every intrusion into our peace, recorded, logged, timestamped. Layla helped. She was meticulous, just like her father. The first major incident occurred on a rainy Thursday. My driveway was slick with early morning moisture, leaves clinging to the edges, and I was pulling my truck out to head to the base for a briefing. That's when I saw her, Marlene Pearson, perched at the edge of her driveway like a hawk, her phone raised, filming my every move. I didn't flinch. I drove slowly past her property, windows down just enough to hear the drizzle, the hum of tires over wet asphalt. She muttered something about illegal parking, but I ignored it. I knew she couldn't enforce anything beyond her own imagination. Later that day, a certified letter arrived. It was from the township. Property owner Marlene Pearson claims obstruction of view and unsafe parking. No legal violation found. File closed. But Marlene wasn't done. Oh no, she had only begun. The next escalation came from the trees. I had 4 large oak trees along the boundary with her property, providing shade, privacy, and a little bit of natural beauty. The first weekend, she sent a note: "Trim the trees immediately or face fines." I laughed. I was 48, but I had spent years managing airfields and explosive ordnance units. A couple of oak trees? Child's play. I trimmed the branches closest to her property, ensuring they weren't encroaching. But still, she wasn't satisfied. She sent more letters, complaining about leaf debris, claiming environmental hazards and pollen allergies. I started keeping a journal. Each complaint, every letter, every note from her, logged with dates, times, and photos. This was no longer just harassment. This was an obsession spiraling out of control. One Monday, Layla came home from school, face pale. "Dad," she said, holding a printout. "She took a picture of me walking to the bus stop again." I felt a chill. There was a line. Children were off limits. Privacy, safety, these were non-negotiable. That evening, I called a lawyer. Marcus Lynn, a sharp, meticulous attorney, agreed to review the evidence. "Colonel Callahan, she's building a dossier against you. Not legally binding yet, but if she escalates, it could be used to intimidate or harass." I nodded. Then we need to be proactive. The turning point came with the driveway incident. One rainy Saturday, Marlene decided my truck was blocking sight lines again. She called the police for the 4th time in 3 weeks. Ramirez and Hicks returned. They measured, they sighed. "You're fine," Ramirez said. "She's persistent, but nothing illegal. Park straight if it makes you feel better." I didn't move. I smiled politely and waved. That night, I reviewed the footage from the trail camera. Marlene had been filming all day, walking back and forth across her lawn, phone always raised, muttering to herself. She wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was a strategist, preparing for the next move. Then came the snow. Early December, a light dusting, the first of the season. I woke to find 3 small mounds of snow pushed onto the edge of my lawn, 2 to 3 feet high, carefully packed, neat edges. Not accidental, not careless, deliberate. Layla gasped. "Dad, they're marking territory." I nodded. This was no longer about trees, mail, or trucks. This was about domination. She wanted to assert control, to show she could invade my property and leave a mark. I took photos. I measured. I logged the GPS coordinates. I called Marcus. "Legal harassment," he said. "Document everything. Every time she does this, it strengthens your case." The first snow wasn't enough. Each time it snowed after that, the piles grew higher, larger, encroaching further onto my property. 3 seasons of this, I realized, would destroy the lawn, frustrate Layla, and escalate tensions to a point I wasn't willing to wait for. By mid-January, I had a plan. It wouldn't be legal action first, not yet. I needed to send a message, a subtle message, a mirror message. I began to research. How do suburban neighborhood vigilantes react to their own tactics? What happens when the observer becomes the observed? I found forums, legal blogs, even military field manuals that, oddly enough, referenced territory control and escalation. I discussed strategies with Layla, making sure she understood boundaries and ethics. "We can't break laws," I told her, "but we can be precise, calculated, and clever." It became clear the next snowfall wouldn't be ignored. The piles she left were like flags planted in enemy territory, and it was time to take them down, or rather, take her territory down. That evening, I reviewed all the footage again, this time on a larger screen. Every step she had taken on our lawn, every picture, every note, every call to the township, all meticulously logged. I circled the problem areas. The driveway, the edge of the property where the snow piled, the line of trees nearest her window. Layla leaned over my shoulder. "Dad, you're actually going to do it, aren't you?" I didn't answer immediately.
There was a long pause, the kind that fills rooms with tension. Then I said, "We're going to make sure she understands that actions have consequences. She's been playing a game, but she didn't realize who she was playing against." Layla's eyes widened. "Like a game of chess?" "Exactly," I said, sipping my coffee. "And it's time for the first move." By the time we went to bed that night, I had a rough plan. It was still in its infancy, just an outline, but it involved controlled, precise measures that would leave a statement without crossing the law. The next morning, the sun glinted off the first frost of the season. The neighborhood was quiet, unaware of the storm brewing behind the smile of Colonel Ethan Callahan and his daughter Layla. The war for Maple Hollow Drive was about to begin.
The next snowfall came quietly, almost innocently, early in the morning. The neighborhood was still asleep, but I was already awake, surveying the edge of our property. The snow piles had returned, taller this time, sharp ridges like white barricades marking her territory. Marlene Pearson had outdone herself. Layla appeared in her robe, holding a mug of steaming cocoa. "Dad, they're bigger than before." I nodded. "They're testing us. It's time to respond." For the first time, I didn't just observe. I measured, photographed, and noted the composition. The piles weren't random. They were deliberately packed, compacted, with careful lines and consistent height. Whoever did this had patience and precision, traits Marlene clearly favored. I pored over the legal boundaries again, ensuring we stayed perfectly within our rights. I didn't want to break the law, but I needed to send a message that this territory wasn't hers to mark. I opened the shed and retrieved the snow shovel. Its handle was worn from years of clearing driveways, the blade scratched from countless encounters with icy stubbornness. This was going to be tactical. Layla joined me outside, gloves tight, scarf wrapped. "So, what's the plan?" I smiled, quietly calculating. "We mirror them. Same style, same intensity, but carefully. We're leaving a message. Actions have consequences." We began with the smallest pile, near the driveway edge. I lifted the first mound, moving it to a neutral area of the yard. Layla helped, packing snow strategically into a small mound along the far boundary. It was subtle but deliberate. She had to notice it, but not immediately understand its meaning. Then we moved to the second pile. This one was more compact, almost professional in its shape. I studied it, noting the sharp edges. Carefully, we dismantled it, reshaping the snow and relocating it to form a long, narrow ridge along the corner of our property, an unmistakable mirror of her intrusion. Layla worked silently, precise and steady. "Dad, this feels like building fortifications." "Exactly," I said. "Defense first, message second." By midday, all the piles had been carefully dismantled and reconstructed along the boundary lines. Each ridge was deliberate, each line clear. From the street, it looked like an ordinary winter yard, but anyone paying attention would notice the symmetry. Marlene emerged around noon, dressed in her standard black coat and sunglasses, phone in hand. She stopped at the edge of her property, tilting her head, studying the yard. I stayed inside, pretending to read a book, watching through the curtain. Layla peeked over the curtain. She's noticing. Marlene circled the property line, snapping pictures, muttering under her breath. Then she stomped back inside, leaving a faint impression of triumph that she thought she had won. But the message had been sent. She had crossed the boundary. We had mirrored her actions. That evening, I reviewed the footage from the trail camera again. Every step she had taken, every photo she had snapped, every pause in her walk, documented. Marcus Lynn, the lawyer, called to check on progress. "You've done well, Colonel. Keep everything logged. She might escalate now." I rubbed my temple.
I know, but this is just the beginning. We're not retaliating recklessly. We're precise, calculated. Marcus sighed. Good, that's the difference between harassment and strategy. The next week brought more challenges. Marlene escalated in new ways. Packages began appearing in our yard again. Small, carefully sealed boxes that seemed innocuous at first, but were clearly meant to intimidate. One contained an empty bird feeder, another a stack of cheap garden lights buried in brown paper. She was testing our response. I instructed Layla to document everything, not touch the items until I reviewed them. Every action she takes, we log. Every detail matters. We began to notice patterns. She preferred early mornings, often between 6 and 7:30. She liked direct paths along the edges of our lawn, always leaving minimal footprints but maximum impact. We mapped it out on graph paper, marking every observed intrusion. Then came the phone calls. Unknown numbers, silent calls, static on the line. Sometimes a deep breath, sometimes nothing at all. Layla started getting them too, a digital echo of Marlene's obsession. It's psychological, I said calmly, though tension tightened my chest. She's trying to control perception, create stress. Layla's eyes narrowed. It won't get to us, right? Not if we stayed disciplined, I reassured her. We control the pace, the reaction, the narrative. She doesn't decide how we respond. One Thursday evening, I decided to take it a step further. I studied the property from every angle, noting the natural high points, the hidden corners, the areas where snow from her yard could accumulate unnoticed. Then I marked my plan on a small sketch pad. The mirror operation. Phase 2. Phase 2 was simple but effective, rearranging snow and ice to subtly reclaim the line, making it clear that our property was ours to control. Nothing illegal, just precise, tactical responses. Layla helped me prepare the tools, shovels, brooms, snow molds, even reflective markers to track movement at night. We rehearsed movements in the living room, timing every step. By the time we went to bed, the plan was set. The first snow of Phase 2 fell a week later, heavy, wet, and fast. I woke before dawn, watching it drift against the darkened landscape. Marlene's piles would form soon, I knew it, and we would be ready. Layla joined me, sipping cocoa. "Dad, are we going to win this?" I smiled, adjusting my gloves. We don't win, we respond. Every action she takes, we mirror, and she realizes there's a cost. Outside, the first mounds began to appear almost immediately after the snow stopped. She was methodical, just like we predicted. But this time, we were faster, more precise. By sunrise, her signature mounds had been dismantled, reshaped into neat ridges along the boundary line, subtle but deliberate. Marlene would notice when she left the house. That was the point. By noon, she was pacing along the edge of her property again, phone in hand. I didn't watch this time. I stayed inside, observing through the dining room window. The tension was palpable. Layla whispered, "She's furious." I said, "Good, it's working exactly as planned." By nightfall, the first strike of Phase 2 was complete. The message had been sent. Marlene Pearson had learned that every action had a calculated response. She might escalate, she might retaliate, but we were ready. Phase 2 was over. Phase 3, however, would require a different approach.
The next week brought an eerie quiet over the neighborhood. Snow had melted, leaving only damp traces of last week's skirmishes, but the tension lingered like frost in the air. Marlene Pearson had vanished from her usual routines, or so it seemed. Layla noticed it first. "Dad, she's not outside. I haven't seen her once today." I nodded, scanning the street through binoculars. She's observing, probably plotting. That's worse than direct action. She's silent, calculating. By Thursday morning, her first subtle move arrived. A thin layer of ice had been deliberately sprayed over a patch of our yard near the old maple tree. It wasn't much, just enough to create a hazard, but enough to send a message. Whoever did this knew the landscape intimately, understood the angles, the walkways. I crouched to inspect it. "This isn't random," I said. "She's learning our responses, probing for weaknesses." Layla frowned. "Can we fix it before she sees?" "Yes," I said, "but we have to document it first." I snapped photos from every angle, careful not to disturb the ice yet. Evidence is everything. It's how we control the narrative. Phase 3 had begun, though Marlene had not yet realized it. Unlike the earlier phases, Phase 3 wouldn't be reactive. It would be proactive. I opened the shed and pulled out an old snowblower, the one we only used for heavy winters. It was loud, intimidating even, and would allow us to move snow in ways we couldn't manually. Layla's eyes widened. "That thing is huge. Are we really going to use it?" "Yes," I said. "Precision requires the right tools. Phase 3 is about sending a clear message without crossing legal lines. Think of it as engineering the landscape." That night, we planned every movement carefully. We mapped the property boundaries, noting every point where Marlene's piles typically appeared. I marked potential snow redistribution zones with chalk and tape, rehearsing with Layla the exact sequence of shoveling and blowing. "It's like choreography," she said, laughing despite the tension. "Exactly," I replied. "Every movement is intentional. Every mound, every ridge has a purpose. She'll see the pattern. She'll understand we're in control." Morning arrived with heavy snowfall. By 5:30 a.m., Marlene's first piles appeared along the edge, sharp and precise as ever. We waited for the sun to rise, then went to work. The snowblower roared to life, cutting a path through the fresh accumulation. I directed Layla to follow specific zones, sculpting ridges along the property line, moving excess snow toward neutral areas. The operation was efficient, calculated, almost artistic. Marlene's piles were dismantled and reconstructed within the hour, but this time, instead of simply mirroring her moves, we subtly reshaped the landscape, creating invisible barriers that would guide future intrusions away from our lawn. By 8 a.m., the yard was a patchwork of ridges, slopes, and gentle mounds. Subtle, precise, functional. To anyone else, it looked like winter landscaping. To Marlene Pearson, it would be a silent but unmistakable message. Your tactics don't work here. Sure enough, Marlene appeared shortly after, dressed in her black coat and mirrored sunglasses. She paused at the boundary, phone in hand. Her eyes flicked over the yard, scanning, analyzing. She circled slowly, snapping photos. Layla whispered, "Dad, she's confused." "Good," I said. "Confusion is the first step toward restraint." Later that day, we noticed new packages in the yard again. This time, small rocks, carefully arranged in a line near the hedge. Marlene was adapting. She wasn't just dumping snow anymore. She was marking territory in subtle, psychological ways. I studied the rocks, noting placement, spacing, pattern. "She's testing perception again," I said. Phase 3 isn't just about snow anymore. It's about controlling the landscape, subtly, without violence. Every intrusion is a clue. Layla looked uneasy. "Is this safe? What if she escalates?" "We stay legal," I reassured her. "Every action documented. We control the response. She can escalate all she wants. She can't outthink the system we've built." By the weekend, Marlene tried a bold move. She had pushed a pile of snow into the side yard near the corner fence. It was taller than usual, almost 3 feet, compacted and smooth. She was testing the limits of our Phase 3 defenses. I watched, silent, calculating. "This is it," I murmured. "Time to shift from reactive to proactive entirely."
Phase 4 will require precision and observation like never before. Layla nodded immediately. "We're ready," she said. That night, we installed temporary cameras along the property line, hidden but angled to capture every movement along the yard. We also added reflective markers to track footprints in the snow. Every detail mattered. Phase 4 would require this level of documentation. As I prepared for bed, I reviewed the sequence of events from the last month. Each action by Marlene Pearson, every response by us, every ridge, mound, and redistributed snow pile, it formed a narrative, a story of escalation, strategy, and control. Layla, tired but alert, asked quietly, "Dad, when does this end?" I paused, looking out the window at the snow-covered yard. It doesn't end until she understands. Every action has consequences, and she will. The night deepened, and a thick fog settled over the neighborhood. Marlene's house appeared silent, but I knew she was observing. The yard lay in shadow, every ridge and mound reflecting moonlight. The first moves of Phase 4 were already in motion, unseen. Phase 4 wouldn't just be snow anymore. It would be strategy, psychology, and anticipation. The groundwork we laid during Phase 3, the ridges, the barriers, the mirrored actions, would serve as both shield and message. We were ready.
The next morning, the fog still clung low over the neighborhood. Snow glistened under the weak February sun, but the yard's new layout of ridges, slopes, and subtle barriers caught every shimmer of light. It wasn't just snow anymore, it was a message. Layla and I stood at the edge of the yard, reviewing the patterns from the previous days. The cameras we installed last night had already captured footprints near the boundary, Marlene Pearson's unmistakable style. She approached methodically, every step deliberate, every pile moved with precision. "Look at the footprints," I said, pointing. "She's testing again, checking which areas are vulnerable." Phase 4 isn't just about the snow, it's about psychology, control perception before she acts. Layla frowned. "But what if she notices the cameras?" "They won't," I said calmly. "They're subtle, hidden, and if she does, we still have evidence. Every action documented is leverage." Phase 4 required a new approach. No longer just responding to Marlene's actions, we were creating scenarios that would make her think twice before attempting anything. We shifted some snow mounds into patterns that suggested paths of resistance, guiding her movements and subtly discouraging intrusion. I taught Layla how to create visual cues using the snow and objects from the shed. Small sticks, strategically placed stones, even our shadows, everything became part of the design. Each element communicated a silent message. This territory is monitored. Actions have consequences. By noon, Marlene made her first visible reaction. I spotted her from the living room window, moving slowly along the property line, her usual black coat and mirrored sunglasses reflecting the sun. She paused at one of the ridges, frowning. Then she circled back, readjusting her approach. "She's confused," Layla whispered. "She doesn't know where to start." "Good," I replied. "Confusion is restraint. Restraint is progress." Over the next few days, Marlene escalated further. She tried to push snow into corners we thought were safe, tested the new ridges with small shovels, even left subtle markers of her own, tiny flags stuck in snow mounds, a silent attempt at claiming space. We documented everything, every photograph, every footprint, every flag. Phase 4 relied on evidence as much as execution. By analyzing her moves, we could anticipate patterns, identify weak points, and reinforce defenses before she even tried again. I called it anticipatory defense. Layla caught on to it quickly. "It's like chess," she said, smiling despite the tension. "We're not just reacting, we're predicting." "Exactly," I said, "and in chess, the player who predicts the opponent's moves controls the game." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we noticed a subtle change.
Marlene had begun leaving small snow piles in unusual locations, far from the usual edges. They were symbolic, statements more than attempts to disruption. I studied the patterns. I murmured, "She's sending messages. She's testing our reactions, but also trying to intimidate." Layla shivered. "Do we respond?" "Yes," I said, "but carefully. Phase 4 is about control, not confrontation. Every response must be precise, subtle, and documented. Overreaction gives her power. Underreaction invites escalation." We moved carefully, reshaping her piles into patterns that guided her perception. Some snow was removed, some redistributed, some enhanced with reflective markers and subtle mounds. Every action was deliberate. By nightfall, the yard looked serene, almost untouched, but every ridge and mound told a story only we could read. By the weekend, the psychological impact was clear. Marlene appeared hesitant, her movements cautious. The subtle barriers, the evidence of surveillance, and the reshaped landscape had altered her behavior. She no longer approached with the same confidence, her usual arrogance replaced by careful calculation. "She's learning," Layla said, watching from the window. "She's scared." I nodded. Not fear exactly, awareness, understanding that she doesn't control this space anymore. Phase 4 culminated in a silent confrontation. One morning, we noticed a pile in the side yard, a bold attempt, taller than usual, but strangely hollowed in the center. Marlene had overextended. I grabbed my notebook, sketching the mound's dimensions, angles, and placement. This is our opportunity. We respond once decisively and reinforce control without confrontation. Layla followed my instructions, placing reflective markers around the pile and redistributing the snow into a series of subtle ridges leading away from our main lawn. The operation was quiet, efficient, and invisible to anyone passing by. By mid-afternoon, the yard looked normal, but the message was clear. Any attempt to dominate our property now had consequences that were silent, strategic, and controlled. Marlene returned that evening, observing from the edge of the property. She circled the yard, her mirrored sunglasses reflecting our work. She stopped near a ridge, examining the patterns. After several minutes of tense movement, she stepped back, sighed, and retreated to her property. Layla whispered, "Did we win?" I shook my head, smiling slightly. "Not yet. We've established control, yes, but the game isn't over. Phase 4 is about influence and anticipation. Phase 5, when it comes, will be final." That night, we reviewed all the evidence. Photos, sketches, video footage, every action taken by Marlene, every response from us, every psychological cue, we cataloged it meticulously. Phase 4 wasn't just snow manipulation anymore. It was a full strategy, combining observation, psychology, and landscape engineering. Layla yawned, exhausted. "I can't believe how much we've learned about snow and tactics," she said with a smile. "Patience and planning," I said. "That's what this entire battle has taught us. Every pile, every ridge, every subtle change builds towards control. And soon, Phase 5 will show her the final consequences of her actions." The neighborhood lay quiet that night, snow reflecting moonlight, ridges and mounds almost artistic in their precision. Marlene Pearson's attempts had been anticipated, redirected, and neutralized without confrontation. But the game wasn't over. Phase 4 had proven we could control perception and influence behavior. Phase 5 would cement the outcome, a final, decisive message that would leave no room for misunderstanding. We were ready.
The week that followed Phase 4 was eerily calm. Marlene Pearson hadn't attempted any new incursions, and the snow-covered landscape appeared serene, almost untouched. But we knew better. Calm was the eye of the storm, and the storm, Phase 5, was approaching. Layla and I spent our mornings reviewing the data we had collected. Footprints, snow pile patterns, subtle markers, timestamps from the hidden cameras. We analyzed everything. Phase 4 had allowed us to predict behavior, but Phase 5 required precision, planning, and absolute control. "We need to anticipate her next move," I said, spreading our sketches across the kitchen table. "Phase 5 isn't just reaction, it's finality. The message must be undeniable." Layla leaned over the sketches. "So we're talking about the ultimate layout?" "Yes," I said. "Every ridge, every mound, every reflective marker, they must combine into a design she can't ignore. But it can't be aggressive. It has to appear natural, inevitable, like the snow itself is telling her story." The next day, we began Phase 5's groundwork. The first step was subtle reinforcement. Using our snowblower and shovels, we reshaped existing piles, enhanced ridges, and created guiding slopes. Each element was intentional, directing her movement, shaping perception, controlling risk. But we didn't stop there. We introduced subtle obstacles: branches from our old oak tree, rocks from the garden path, and carefully placed stakes. Nothing that could be seen as threatening, only enough to guide, deter, and document. By late afternoon, the yard had transformed. From a casual glance, it appeared like a simple, snow-covered lawn, but under careful observation, every ridge, mound, and marker was part of a silent communication network, our ultimate Phase 5 message. The next evening, Marlene appeared at the edge of the property. Her posture was tense, her usual confidence replaced by careful calculation. She paused near a mound, tapping it lightly with her shovel. She circled the perimeter, inspecting every ridge, every subtle slope. Layla whispered, "She's noticing the patterns." "Good," I said. "Phase 5 is about perception. She must see control, even if she doesn't understand it fully." Marlene made a tentative attempt to rearrange a small pile near the side yard. I grabbed my notebook, noting angles, height, and placement. Everything was documented. Phase 5 wasn't just execution, it was proof. Evidence that every action taken by her would be anticipated, redirected, and neutralized. Over the next 2 days, we fine-tuned the final layout. Reflective markers were placed strategically to catch early morning sun, creating subtle optical illusions, guiding lines that appeared natural but communicated boundaries. The ridges were sharpened slightly, not to hurt, but to prevent her from approaching easily. Small channels were created, directing potential intrusions away from the main lawn. Layla marveled at the transformation. "It almost looks artistic, like someone designed it to feel peaceful but intimidating." "Exactly," I replied. "Nature itself is the messenger. She'll see it and understand. Control doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be undeniable." Phase 5's true test came on the third morning. Marlene attempted a bold move, trying to displace a large ridge near the front edge. From the window, we watched her carefully, noting every step, every hesitation. She overextended, misjudged the slope, and nearly slipped into the shallow channel we had created. I took notes quickly. "She's testing limits," I said. "Now is the time to finalize the message." Layla followed my lead, making slight adjustments to the channels and ridges. The goal wasn't confrontation, it was inevitability. Every movement by Marlene now met resistance precisely where we intended. Every action was anticipated. By noon, the yard looked untouched again, but the strategic design was complete. The subtle barriers, guiding slopes, and reflective cues combined into a cohesive system. Anyone unfamiliar with the layout would see a simple, snow-covered lawn, but Marlene understood. She no longer had freedom here. Every action would be anticipated and every attempt redirected. That evening, Marlene stood at the property line, inspecting her options. She moved cautiously along the edges, her confidence eroded by our anticipation and control. After several minutes, she retreated, leaving the yard untouched. Layla whispered, "Did we finally stop her?" I shook my head. Not entirely. Phase 5 isn't about stopping her. It's about dominance without confrontation. She must understand that any attempt now is futile. We documented her retreat, taking photographs and video from multiple angles. Every proof of her hesitation, every sign of acknowledgement was collected. Phase 5 required not just execution, but undeniable evidence that control had been established. By nightfall, the neighborhood lay quiet under a blanket of snow.
The yard, meticulously designed and executed, reflected moonlight. Ridges, channels, reflective markers, every element communicated the message clearly. This was our domain, every intrusion anticipated and redirected. Layla yawned, exhausted but satisfied. It's beautiful and terrifying in the right way. I smiled. Phase 5 is the culmination of everything we've done. Every ridge, every mound, every subtle cue, it all leads to a single point: control. Not through confrontation, but through precision and inevitability. We stepped back, observing our work. Marlene Pearson would understand, without a word spoken, that her attempts of dominance were over. Phase 5 had succeeded.
The night had settled on Willow Creek like a velvet curtain, stretching across rooftops and tree-lined streets. The air smelled faintly of rain, the aroma of wet asphalt mingling with the lingering scent of cut grass from the day before. I sat on the front porch of my new home, a cup of dark roast coffee steaming in my hands. The hum of cicadas and distant chirping crickets filled the quiet. It was the kind of evening that whispered of peace, of routine, of normalcy. Except normalcy had long since left the driveway across the street, where my neighbor, Marjorie Lang, resided. Marjorie, a woman in her late 50s with hair always sculpted into an unyielding helmet of curls, had made it her personal mission to scrutinize my every move since the day I moved in. She and her husband, Kenneth, had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and according to local gossip, she'd driven 3 previous families out with complaints, threats, and relentless bureaucracy. It was the perfect storm of obsessive control, and I had become her latest target. My daughter, Emma, perched beside me, her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone quietly. She glanced up at me, her hazel eyes filled with that blend of curiosity and trust that children carry when they know they're in safe hands. "Dad," she said softly, "are we ready for whatever she does next?" I took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. "We're ready, sweetie," I said. "We've prepared for months. Every move she makes only strengthens our position. She's been digging her own grave without realizing it." Emma's lips curled into a small smile. It wasn't quite the smile she had before the fire of grief hit us, the fire that took her mother 3 years ago, but it was a step in the right direction. Sarah had been the anchor of our family, the glue that held together our chaos as we moved between duty stations, deployments, and schools. Her absence had left a vacuum that even I, after 23 years in the Air Force, struggled to fill. But this house in Willow Creek was supposed to be the end of that cycle, a place to finally breathe, to let Emma just be 16 without the weight of military scrutiny pressing down on her shoulders. I glanced at the driveway, half expecting to see Marjorie peering through binoculars or positioning her phone for another evidence shot. Instead, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the distant glow of streetlights reflecting off the asphalt. It was the calm before the storm, and I knew it. Marjorie never stopped. She was meticulous, patient, and cunning, and she had already escalated the game in ways that bordered on criminal. Weeks of documentation had brought us here. My binder sat inside, thick with police reports, certified letters, photographs, timestamps, screenshots, and witness statements. Every single complaint Marjorie had filed, from fabricated parking violations to frivolous inspector general complaints at the local base where she worked, was cataloged in painstaking detail. The binder was organized chronologically, indexed, tabbed, and highlighted. It wasn't more than evidence. It was a roadmap of her obsession, a blueprint for the legal and administrative storm I intended to unleash. Garrett, our neighbor and unofficial ally, had dropped by earlier in the day. His kitchen table had been littered with photographs and folders documenting Marjorie's previous campaigns against other neighbors on our street. Stroke victims, elderly couples, young families. Her pattern was unmistakable. Every neighbor she had harassed had either moved or had been forced into compliance. "She's dangerous," Garrett had said gravely, handing me another stack of printouts. "Not physically, but the way she manipulates systems, that's her weapon." I nodded, my mind already racing through contingencies.
That's why we document everything. Every move, every call, every complaint. She can't claim ignorance. She can't hide behind her concerned citizen mask anymore. That evening, as twilight settled, Emma and I sat on the porch, watching heat lightning flicker in the distance. The sky was a canvas of deep purples and muted oranges, the kind of sky that promised a storm but hadn't delivered yet. We sipped our coffee in silence, the kind of silence that carries weight because both of us knew what was coming. 3 days from now, the restraining order hearing would determine the outcome of months of harassment, and Marjorie, blissfully unaware, would finally confront the consequences of her obsession. I checked the cameras we had installed over the weekend. 2 Nest units perched on the corners of the house, their infrared LEDs blinking red in the fading light. Every movement across our property was now recorded, time-stamped, and backed up. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that if Marjorie attempted to escalate again, every action would be documented in a way that left no room for her manipulation. The phone buzzed. Councilwoman Caltham Latham, a retired sergeant major and our steadfast ally, had sent a text confirming that the chronic complainer ordinance would pass in the next township council meeting. Any future complaints Marjorie filed would now be restricted, requiring written documentation and attorney review, with penalties for frivolous or malicious submissions. It was a small victory, but significant. The system, which she had weaponized for so long, was now turning against her. Captain Diane Ortiz, my JAG liaison, called. Her voice was calm, but tinged with excitement. "Colonel," she said, "the restraining order petition is ready. Everything you've documented is airtight. When you're ready, we file." I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the anticipation. Not yet, I thought. Let her make one final mistake. Let her escalate. Every action she takes now strengthens the case against her. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. "Can we just move?" she asked softly. The vulnerability in her voice tugged at me. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "No," I said firmly. "This is our home. We've moved too many times already. We're not leaving because she wants to control everything. She'll learn that actions have consequences, just like we always tell people in the military. And she's about to learn it the hard way." The stars began to pierce the sky, tiny points of light twinkling over Willow Creek. The rhythmic chirping of crickets continued, a soundtrack of normalcy in the midst of impending chaos. I could almost feel the storm approaching, the air thick with electricity, the kind that makes hair stand on end. The tension wasn't just atmospheric, it was personal, built over months of harassment, manipulation, and false accusations. 3 days later, Marjorie would file a false CPS report on Emma, her most audacious move yet. She didn't know that every single action had been anticipated, every potential escalation accounted for. Kim Brennan from Child Protective Services, an empathetic and thorough investigator, would arrive to find a clean, safe home, but the report itself would become part of the evidence, another knot tied in the rope Marjorie had been spinning for herself. I sipped the last of my coffee and set the mug down on the porch railing. Emma stretched her legs out, glancing towards the driveway. "Do you think she'll do something tonight?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but that's fine. That only makes our case stronger. She can't help herself. People like Marjorie always make mistakes when they feel cornered." The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint smell of charcoal from a neighbor's grill and the electric tang of the approaching storm. The security cameras blinked silently in the darkness, their lenses capturing every detail, every shadow, every movement. I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. Months of preparation, documentation, and patience were about to pay off. The storm wasn't just coming, we were ready for it. I glanced at Emma, sleeping now, her head on my shoulder. The lavender candle her mother had loved flickered faintly beside us, casting a soft glow. "We did this right, kiddo. The long way, the careful way, not through intimidation, not through rank, but through proper channels, preparation, and patience. She'll see soon enough that actions have consequences." The night deepened, and I could hear the faint rumble of distant thunder. The storm was on schedule, building quietly, inexorably, while I sat on the porch and watched, knowing that everything we had prepared was about to meet the final test. Marjorie had no idea. She thought she was orchestrating the final act of her campaign. In reality, she had just handed us every tool we needed to end it. And tomorrow, in court, she would finally see the result of her obsession, the mirror of her own making reflected back in meticulous detail, undeniable and inescapable. I leaned back, letting the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. 3 days, that's all it would take. Then she would learn, painfully and irrevocably, what happens when you weaponize bureaucracy, harassment, and false reports against people who are prepared, patient, and thorough. The storm was coming, and for the first time in months, I felt truly ready.
The morning broke over Willow Creek with a brittle, almost anxious light. The sky was overcast, low clouds hanging heavy and gray, pressing down like a warning. Even the birds seemed subdued, their usual cheerful chatter muted to soft trills. I stood at the edge of the driveway, coffee in hand, surveying the property that had been under siege for months. Every shrub, every fence post, every blade of grass had been meticulously inspected and maintained in anticipation of this day. The day when all of Marjorie Lang's obsession, manipulation, and harassment would be confronted in the court of law. Emma sat on the porch steps, her backpack beside her, eyes scanning the street nervously. "Do you think she'll show up?" she asked. Her voice carried a quiet mix of fear and anticipation. "She will," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "And when she does, every single action she's taken, every false claim, every attempt to intimidate us, it's going to be reflected back at her. She won't see it coming, not fully. She thinks she's the predator. But today, we prove that patience, preparation, and facts win over obsession every single time." The front door clicked open, and Emma's best friend, Lila, slipped out quietly. Lila had been with Emma since middle school, a quiet witness to all the tension, all the preparation. She carried a small binder of her own, a compilation of statements and photographs she'd gathered with Emma's help. "Morning," she said softly, giving me a determined nod. "Let's make this clean, no surprises." I nodded. "Exactly. We stick to the plan. Documentation first, facts only, patience in every answer. Let the storm come, we won't flinch." By mid-morning, the courthouse loomed, a stately brick building with tall columns and an entrance flanked by trim hedges. I parked in the visitor lot, glancing at Emma and Lila as they buckled their coats against the crisp February air. "Ready?" I asked. Emma exhaled slowly, "As I'll ever be." Lila squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed a nervous flutter. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was taut, the air heavy with anticipation. Judge Howard, a stern woman with decades of experience, reviewed the papers on her desk with meticulous care. She looked up, meeting my gaze briefly before returning to the files. The room hummed with quiet murmurs of spectators and staff, a subtle reminder that this was a public space where precision and decorum mattered more than emotion. Marjorie Lang arrived a few minutes later, escorted by her husband, Kenneth. She carried herself with the same rigidity and confidence she had shown for months, her curls perfectly styled, her expression carefully calculated. Yet there was a subtle tension in her eyes, the kind that betrayed a simmering frustration beneath the controlled exterior. She didn't see the cameras, the prepared statements, or the witnesses who would undermine her narrative step by step. The proceedings began. My attorney, Captain Diane Ortiz, presented our case with precision and clarity. The evidence binder, now a comprehensive record of months of harassment, false claims, and manipulation, was laid before the judge. Each page, each photograph, each time-stamped message told the story of relentless obsession and intimidation, leaving no room for denial. Marjorie's attempts to interject were quickly countered with factual evidence.
Every claim she made had been anticipated. Every misstatement was corrected with meticulous documentation. Judge Howard, with a practiced eye, noted discrepancies, inconsistencies, and repeated falsehoods, her pen scratching decisively across the notes. At one point, Marjorie's voice rose, sharp and desperate. "I am only concerned for the safety and well-being of this neighborhood. These people," she gestured toward Emma and me, "they are not safe." I remained seated, Emma clutching Lila's hand. Diane raised her hand calmly. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "we have provided irrefutable evidence of the complainant's pattern of harassment. The respondents, Mr. and Ms. Collins, have maintained a safe, lawful environment at all times. The claim presented is entirely fabricated." Judge Howard's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, every witness, and every piece of evidence. Then, in a quiet but commanding voice, she said, "I have reviewed all documentation, heard testimony from multiple witnesses, and considered the history of interactions between these parties. It is clear that the claims brought forth are not only unsubstantiated, but part of a continuing pattern of harassment and intimidation." A wave of relief washed over me. Emma's grip on Lila's hand loosened as a small, almost imperceptible smile crossed her face. She looked at me, her eyes wide, reflecting the magnitude of what was happening. Judge Howard continued, "Effective immediately, a permanent restraining order is issued against Marjorie and Kenneth Lang, prohibiting contact, harassment, or interference with the Collins family. Any future attempts to circumvent this order will result in immediate legal consequences, including fines and potential imprisonment. Additionally, all records of malicious complaints filed against the Collins family will be reviewed for potential civil action." Marjorie's mouth opened, but no words came out. Kenneth tugged at her arm, a silent attempt to guide her out of the courtroom, but she froze, staring at the judge, the binder, the witnesses, anyone but reality. Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to break through the clouds, casting pale gold streaks across the street. Emma exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with relief. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Not just over," I said. "We did it the right way. Legal, patient, meticulous, and we won. You'll never have to worry about her again." The storm that had loomed over Willow Creek for months had finally passed, not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with preparation, patience, and unwavering determination. The binder that had once been a tool of anxiety had become a shield and a weapon of truth. Back at home, Emma and Lila sat on the porch with hot chocolate, watching neighbors pass by, greeting each other casually, oblivious to the weeks of tension that had filled this small street. I checked the cameras once more, ensuring all footage was safely archived. Every action, every false claim, every attempt to harassment, everything was documented, and everything had contributed to the outcome. As night fell, I walked the perimeter of the yard, the moon casting silver shadows across the lawn. There was a profound sense of closure, a deep satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served, without vengeance, without shortcuts. The meticulous planning, the patience, and the unwavering commitment to truth had culminated in a resolution that felt not just fair, but morally righteous. Emma joined me, her hand slipping into mine. "Do you think she'll ever change?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Some people can't, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that we protected ourselves, stayed true to the facts, and proved that obsession and harassment can't win when faced with preparation and truth. That's all anyone can do." We stood there in silence, looking at the quiet street, knowing that our home, our sanctuary, was safe. The lights from neighboring houses glowed warmly, a soft reminder that life will continue, as it always does, beyond conflict and fear. The storm had passed. Marjorie Lang and her schemes had been defeated, not with anger, not with retaliation, but with patience, preparation, and truth. and for the first time in months, Willow Creek felt like home.